Hello, Professor Orr. Welcome to the Curiosity Podcast. How are you feeling today?
Well, good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I am a little upset because I'm in New York right now and we had 2 days where it was lovely. The sun was out, it was 70 degrees, and now it's back to 30 something.
I know
How's
the
the weather?
feeling. I'm in Providence, so we've had the same weather pattern here. So, it's been a terrible winter on the East Coast. So it's been the worst winter I think I've experienced in my 26 years in Providence and in Rhode Island. And you're right, it's cool today, and a few days ago it was in the 70s and sunny. I was on campus and all the students were out a couple of days ago, just taking in the sunshine and the warm weather. I bet today they're probably all wrapped up when I go out there later.
Yeah, they will be. I had to walk my dog this morning and I have, a long coat on. Like I had to put on my long coat and my scarf for sure. And the fact that you said that this is probably the worst winter you've seen in over 20 years, that says a lot.
Oh yeah, and there are folk who've lived up here way before I have, and they count this as one of a challenging winter. We Rhode Island a couple weeks ago, I believe, got 3 feet of snow. We had a blizzard and got the most snow ever recorded in Rhode Island's history. So the blizzard of 2026 is what people now refer to the big snowfall. So
Yeah,
historic event.
very
So we had to
historic.
shovel out and help neighbors get out, and yeah, so it's a winter that we all will I think remember.
Very historic. So, as much as I would love to talk to you about the weather, you are here, Professor Orr, to talk about your latest book called House of Diggs. Now, the subtitle is The Rise and Fall of America's Most Consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs Jr. We're going to get into the word consequential. I'm a language person. And so the word that's a big word, consequential, to even use that, to say that he is the most consequential black congressman. So before we even get into that, here's the thing, Professor Orr. I'm a black American. My family has been in this country for many years. I'm a very proud black American. My family is political, very civic minded,
Mhm.
very history minded. And of all the people that we have talked about in my many years of living on this earth, Mr. Charles C. Diggs was not one of them, Professor Orr. So, can you tell me why I have never heard of this consequential black congressman before?
Yeah, the historians and journalists like to focus on a handful of black leaders, and we recycle those handful of black leaders annually. You know who they are. And that's the problem. That's why you haven't heard of them, because people, focus on those well-known, famous people like Malcolm X and Dr. King, maybe Adam Clayton Powell. Uh, yeah, Diggs was also a very unassuming, hardworking, unassuming kind of person who I think was overshadowed by many of the black leaders of his era. But make no mistake about it, my book is a corrective history, elevates Charles Diggs to the place he ought to have been and deserves. He was a phenomenal American leader, civil rights leader, and a dynamic legislator in Congress. And so, yeah, it's sad. It's a sad commentary that here you are. You say, well, listen, let me tell you this. I have political science colleagues who have PhDs in political science who don't know about Charles Diggs Jr. So not at all surprised. There was a review of the book in the Wall Street Journal, and the first line in the book, I'm sorry, in the review, the author writes that many people will have not heard of this subject of this book I'm about to review. And yeah, I'm trying to change that. This dude really is phenomenal. He helped change America. He helped bring black freedom to blacks here in America. And Diggs was also a freedom fighter for blacks in Africa.
So your book, taking a look at some excerpts of it, really dig deep into who Charles C. Diggs was. But just going back to, again, me never hearing this name, in your book, this is what you say as to the first time you heard about him. You said, I first heard about Congressman Diggs when I was in high school and became interested in government and politics. In 1978, around the same time Diggs's payroll kickback scheme became public, ABC hired black broadcast journalist Max Robinson to co-anchor the World News Tonight broadcast. It was the first time a black person anchored a national newscast, meaning the first time that you even heard about this incredible man, he was involved in a scandal. Do you believe that that could have contributed to his name being forgotten?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. There's no question about that. Diggs would serve in Congress for about 25 years, and we're going to talk about some remarkable things he accomplished. At the end of his career, he was indicted and then convicted on 29 counts of violating Congress's payroll rules. He was involved in a payroll, what we call a payroll kickback scheme. And Diggs would be censured, first of all, by Congress, which is, them admonishing him for bringing a bad reputation to Congress for being involved in this. And then he would eventually resign from Congress. And then he would actually spend 7 months in a federal prison in Alabama. Yeah, I think part of his downfall is one reason why we don't talk about him a lot. Well, there have been other leaders who've had downfalls, black leaders, others, yet they have not been erased from the history books, if you will, or from our collective memory. Take, for example, Marion Barry. I don't know if you know who Marion Barry
I
was,
do.
but Marion
I do.
Barry was the mayor of Washington, D.C. for many years, a black leader who got in trouble with the law several times, and he is revered. I think it's fair to say revered, even to this day, at least among black Washingtonians. You see? So that's the puzzle for me, in that we have seen leaders who got in trouble, but nevertheless people recognize their contributions, they're not erased. So it's a puzzle for me, quite frankly. Why is it that he would be the one who would be erased because of his downfall? So it's a very complicated kind of thing. So yes, to answer your question, yeah, I think this has something to do with it. Yeah, that is, he ended up, at the end of his career, tarnishing really a remarkable public career.
And considering that House of Diggs, again, is your latest book, because you are the author of 8 books, is that correct?
Yeah, author and editor. I've edited.
An
Yes,
editor.
yes,
That's correct. Author and editor of 8 books. So this is your latest book, House of Diggs. And it is the first biography
yeah.
of Charles C. Diggs Jr. So because it's the first one, this is incredible because you've made history, right? In writing the first biography for this incredible man. Since you use the word consequential, I want to go back to that. Why is he the most consequential black congressman? That is a big statement,
Yeah,
Professor
that's
Orr.
a claim that I make as an
Yeah,
academic. It's a
that's right.
claim that I lay out in the book. And I think it's a claim that is substantiated by the documentation laid out in the 27 chapters of House of Diggs. Diggs was consequential because of his significant legacy, tangible legacy that he left behind. And I tell you this, there are very, very few congressional Congress members of any stripe, black, white, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, who has the kind of legacy and record that Charles Diggs Jr. had. And so, yes, I make the claim that he's the most consequential, and I lay it out in the book. Chapter by chapter, you see this Congress member just really working hard, working seriously around policy issues that affect Black Americans here in this country, and later he would focus on Africa. Diggs, for example, was the only federal official at the trial of the two white men who killed Emmett Till. Okay, he went down to Mississippi just a few months after taking office in 1955. He goes down to Mississippi to observe the trial of these two white men who were acquitted, but who we know later on confessed to having killed the 14-year-old black boy from Chicago. Diggs was there in the courtroom for 5 days down in Mississippi in 1955, and he wrote about his 5 days down there. And know what he told the readers in this essay that appeared in the Pittsburgh Courier, a black newspaper? He wrote that he was afraid every day because he knew that he, like any other black person, could have been killed down there in Mississippi, talking about he's observing the trial. He was a brave, brave young Congress member to do that. He was only 32 years old, and he had a big impact on the trial when he was down there. Let me tell you, for example, the black witnesses that reluctantly came forward to testify against the two white men, they later told reporters and their family members that they got the courage to stand up in that courtroom and point an accusing finger at those two white men because they looked out in the courtroom and saw a powerful black man named Charles Diggs, and that gave them the courage to stand up and testify against those two white men. A very dangerous thing to do in Mississippi in 1955. Yes, he was consequential. Diggs was the founder, okay? Listen to this. He was the founder of the Congressional Black Caucus. Okay, this is the organization of black members of the House and Senate today that numbers around 62 members today. When it was formed in 1969, there was only 13 members. And so you hear people refer to 13 founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Yes, there were 13 founding members, but you really have to distinguish Diggs from the other 12 because it was Diggs who brought those members together and said, you know what? We are to form an organization among ourselves in solidarity so that we can speak on behalf of our constituencies, many of whom were Black Americans. So Diggs in 1969 brought the 9 members at the time together, and they formed what Diggs called the Democratic Select Committee. And then in 1971, the organization changed their name from the Democratic Select Committee to the Congressional Black Caucus, and Diggs became the first chairman of it. So he was not just one of 13 members. He was the guy who really had the idea to say, let's do this. Not only had the idea, he took his leadership to bring these brothers and sisters, because there was Shirley Chisholm, who was a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, you see, the only black woman at the time to be a part of it. Diggs, I'll stop real quickly, was consequential because he was also the leader in our country in leading America's anti-apartheid movement. It was Diggs who began talking about apartheid in the 1950s and 1960s. We tend to think of the anti-apartheid movement in this country in the 1980s and 1990s, which when it really took off. But let me tell you, Diggs was working on this issue in the late 50s and early 1960s. Diggs became the first American legislator to take a considerable long-term interest in Africa. He became known among his colleagues on Capitol Hill as Mr. Africa because he took this policy interest in Africa. He would go to Africa more than any other Congress member in the history of the United States Congress. He was consequential because one can connect Diggs' anti-apartheid efforts to the election of Nelson Mandela as the first Black African to be president of South Africa. And Diggs finally, he was so consequential because Diggs was the person in Congress to restore home rule to Washington, D.C. Most
Please
people
explain
don't.
what that means. What
Let
does
me
that
tell
mean?
you real quickly. Most people don't know this. Home rule provides local democracy to the District of Columbia. Washington, D.C. is a unique city. It is the home of our federal government. And so it is literally controlled by the Congress. There's language in the Constitution that gives Congress, quote, exclusive, unquote, authority over the federal district. DC was created out of parts of Virginia and parts of Maryland to be the site of our national government. So for 100 years, most people don't know this, the President of the United States appointed the mayor and other high-ranking officials in the District of Columbia. That's right.
Really?
Yeah, yes. See, early on, when the district was first established, Congress, which had authority over the district by the Constitution, when they first established the district, they had home rule. They had local democracy. They allowed voters to elect the mayor. Okay? But then the Civil War came, Reconstruction came, more black people moved to the district, black men got the right to vote, and soon as black people became a sizable minority in the District of Columbia, and soon as black men received the right to vote and gained some influence during Reconstruction, Congress stripped home rule away
Okay.
after Reconstruction. So no longer would Congress allow local people to elect the mayor. They took it away because they did not want black people to run the national site of government, what we now call Washington, D.C. And for 100 years, Congress refused to allow local people to restore local democracy in Washington, D.C. And it took Charles Diggs, who in 1973 pushed through the Home Rule Bill that now allow local voters in D.C. to elect people like Muriel Bowser, Marion Barry. They can all attribute their election, quite frankly, to the work of Congressman Charles C. Diggs and the work he did in pushing the Home Rule Bill through the Congress, which is, as you probably know, currently under attack. D.C. residents would like to be the 51st state of the union, and Diggs, I think, if he were here, would be promoting that also. He understood that home rule was limited, but he, in some way, was able to use his skills as a legislator to put together a coalition to pass this home rule bill that President Nixon, a Republican, signed into law. That's why. Listen, this is why this brother is the most consequential black person ever to serve in Congress. And I would add very quickly, one of the most consequential people ever, a white, black, Democrat, Republican to serve in the United States Congress. He was a phenomenal black leader, a phenomenal American leader.
This book is enlightening, but it's also infuriating to know that this man was walking here on this earth. And I didn't know about him. And a lot of people didn't know about him, just specifically the Black American community. That's what I'm really talking about.
Yeah,
okay.
yes.
So when you make this claim that he is the most consequential black congressman, I can see that. Especially with this home rule bill.
Yeah,
Anti-apartheid, right? But the home rule...
I can interrupt real quick. I didn't get through all the stuff he did, okay? So we can say that.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. Oh, we know. It's 27 chapters, right? We know, okay? But what you've already presented is evidence enough for you to make that claim, for it to be at least a reasonable claim, which is incredible, right? So, okay, you have Charles C. Diggs with all of these amazing accomplishments. You painted a beautiful picture, especially of when he went down to the trial of the two white men who brutally murdered Emmett Till. Emmett Till was from my hometown of Chicago, Illinois. Yeah. Great city, best city in the world, Professor
Orr. I love Chicago. Yes. I study cities, I love cities. So, yes.
Yeah. So I kind of want to go back to the trial a little bit because I want to get into the mind of Mr. Diggs. Not that you met him in real life. This is a biography, but I do want to know why he decided to go down there. Again, this is 1955, Jim Crow. Okay, you're saying yes, I'm afraid, but what kind of impact was he attempting to make? You kind of gave the story of the juror, right? And that's her or their, because I forget it was one or two people, their sort of bravery, their courage to be able to even be on a jury was seeing him right in the courtroom. But why did he do that? What was his motivation?
Yeah. Well, I think when you read the book, when your listeners read the book, you get more context for the trial itself. Let me be very clear. Diggs' ancestral home was Mississippi. His father, Charles Diggs Sr., was born and raised in the Delta of Mississippi, not far from where Emmett Till had been killed. Okay? In fact, Diggs and his father visited Mississippi a few months before Emmett Till had been killed. It was Congressman Diggs' first visit to Mississippi in the spring of 1955. Okay, so Diggs, I tell you, once Diggs got elected, he took office in January 1955. In April of 1955, he was invited to give a speech at a big convention sponsored by a Black civil rights organization in the state of Mississippi. And he went down to a place called Mound Bayou, Mississippi in the spring of 1955. And Diggs spoke. He brought his father with him. And it was Diggs' first time ever in Mississippi. And I believe that experience there for those couple of days really awakened him to what he knew was a real struggle, but he could see it and feel it physically when he and his father went down there. For example, when he and his father flew into Jackson, Mississippi, and landed at the Jackson airport, the first thing the young congressman would see was signs saying white, black for water fountains, white, black for the restrooms, white, black for the sitting area. And you see, he grew up in Detroit. Now, while he was aware of segregation, now he's really feeling it right at home in his ancestral home of Mississippi. I think that's part of what's happening is that he really feels a strong connection to Mississippi. And Diggs, quite frankly, would continue during his career, early his career, working to help people in Mississippi, working closely, for example, with Medgar Evers, who became the NAACP leader in Mississippi. He met with he would go down to Mississippi, Clarksdale, and literally almost got killed while in Clarksdale, Mississippi in the summer of 1963. So he goes to the trial in part, I believe, because he has a familiar connection, ancestral connection to Mississippi, and he had just come from the Delta, Mississippi, having been invited to give this huge speech in the town of Mount Bayou. Some 13,000 Black people came to Mount Bayou to hear Congressman Diggs' speech in the spring of 1955. And let me tell you this, two of the civil rights leaders who Diggs met at the speech were killed a few months before Emmett Till. That's right. A very prominent minister and pastor, a civil rights leader who Diggs had met down there during the speech. He was brutally murdered, okay, a few weeks after Diggs left Mississippi. And then a few weeks before Emmett Till was killed, another Black leader whom Diggs had met in the spring in Mount Bayou was also killed. And so he is motivated in part because he sees the brutality going on down there, and he wants to do something about it. And so he announced on his radio program. I should tell your viewers that that Diggs' family owned a prominent funeral home in
I was going to
Detroit.
get into that.
Yeah, and the funeral home was called the House of Diggs, and he had a radio show that came on Sunday morning, and Diggs was the host of the show, Congressman Diggs, and so he announced one day that I'm going to go down to Mississippi and I'm going to observe the trial. He contacted the judge ahead of time, so the judge knew he was coming down there, and he brought along with him two other Black men, one of his staff members and a person who had helped him on his campaign for Congress. I'm convinced that Diggs brought those two men along with him because he knew the danger of going down there, and I don't think he wanted to go alone. And so he brought two men with him. Two men who, by the way, Black men, who were so light complexion that Diggs is convinced that their presence protected him, that is Diggs, from the white segregationists down there, because the white segregationists, Diggs later wrote, believed the two light complexion Black men were actually white FBI agents sent to protect Diggs. And so he's convinced that his two buddies, who looked white but who were Black, protected him because these ignorant white people down in Mississippi assumed that these were men who were there to protect Diggs, not realizing they were his staff member and his friend. So he was motivated in part because he felt a strong connection to Mississippi. Yeah.
And that makes sense. And then he also used wisdom with the two men that he brought along with him, which I'm
Yes,
very
yes.
happy. Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah, I
Okay, I
find that
can.
kind of funny though. Diggs said, you know what? I think these people thought these guys were white, security people who, for the federal government, and they actually, help protect him because it was a dangerous thing to do down there, and he was brave. And
Mhm.
listen, let me emphasize this: he didn't have to do it. He was not elected to represent Mississippi. He was elected to represent the 13th district of Michigan, Detroit. But you know what Diggs announced after the trial? Of course, he was disappointed, obviously, that the jury acquitted the two white men who had killed the boy. But what Diggs said at the end of the trial, I think, is very, very significant. What he said was that he came down to Mississippi, stayed those 5 days to support the black men and women of Mississippi. And he also said that coming down to Mississippi and being in the courtroom, that he was sending a signal. Don't forget, he's only a few months into his new term, his first term as a Congress member. And there was a lot of speculation when Diggs got elected about what kind of Congress member he was going to be. There were only two other blacks in Congress when Diggs went to Congress in January of 1955. Adam Clayton Powell was from New York City, and there was a guy named William Dawson from Chicago. They were the only other two. There were just three blacks. So after the trial, Diggs made it clear for those who were wondering, okay, what kind of Congress member will Diggs be? Will he be like Adam Clayton Powell, a black militant, black radical, or will he be more like Dawson, who was quite conservative? Well, here's what Diggs was saying. Diggs was saying to America, by going down to Mississippi and observing the trial, he was saying that as a Congress member, he planned to be a Congress member for all of Black America. That's what he was trying to uh, indicate to America. That although I was elected from Detroit, I plan to be a Congress member for all of Black America. And Diggs would, early in his career, hit and visit many of the civil rights hotspots in the 50s and 60s. Not only would he go to the Emmett Till, the trial of the two white men who killed Emmett Till, a few months later, about a year later, he's down in Montgomery, Alabama, supporting the young preacher named Martin Luther King, who was leading a bus boycott. And so Diggs goes down to Montgomery in the spring of 1956, and he meets Dr. King for the first time, and those two men develop a relationship, a friendship that will last until Dr. King was killed in April of 1968. So yes, Diggs was saying, I plan to be a Congress member for all of Black America. This fits in with why he would form the Congressional Black Caucus. So the caucus can speak for all of Black America, you see.
You know what's interesting, Professor Orr? First of all, I'm going to change it up to Dr. Orr. This is a this is a side note because in your biography, Dr. Orr, as I was reading just your background, I'm reading, oh my gosh, he's authored and edited 8 books. He's the inaugural, oh my gosh, I have to get the exact title
Fred
right.
Lippert, Professor Fred. Yep.
Yes. All these things, I'm like, he has to have a PhD. So I'm continuing to read. And I'm like, there it is. There's your PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park. So I'm going to call you Dr. Orr because that's incredible. But Dr. Orr, what I'm getting from Mr. Diggs is that he really had a heart for the people. And the older that I get, I really respect and see how the specificity, especially of our Black civil rights activists and politicians, the specificity meaning being like, I want to be the leader or a change maker for my people. That's the specificity of it. That specificity for me is heart, is the love. That's why a lot of people to this day love Martin Luther King Jr. because we can still see his heart. Same thing with Malcolm X. Malcolm X had his, issues and everything, but in his evolution, you could see his heart, his love for his people. What you're describing to me is a man who loved his people. And I would argue that before his political life, you could really see that he loved people because he was a funeral director. I want to get into that, Dr. Orr, because I recently had to bury my mom back in October. And so I worked with a Black funeral home director. This is the first time I've ever had to, bury anybody. And there's a certain kind of, again, heart that you have to have for people when they're going through the loss of a loved one. What's your understanding of who Mr. Diggs was as a funeral director?
I'm sorry for the loss of your mother, and I know exactly what you had to go through, because I had to do that myself recently.
I'm sorry for your loss too. Then.
Diggs' grandfather was a Baptist preacher in Mississippi. His paternal grandfather, James Diggs. In fact, James Diggs would actually not only be a Baptist preacher, but he was a Baptist missionary who went to Africa, to Liberia. So I say that to say that Diggs come from a family of connected to Christianity. His mother, in particular, his mother's side of the family, they were Methodists for the CME denomination of Black Methodists. In fact, his uncle was his mother's brother was a big bishop in the CME church. Diggs' father, as I indicated, and his mother formed a funeral home in the 1920s, which became a huge success in Detroit, called the House of Diggs. And I believe that the father, Charles Diggs Sr., when you read about him and read about how he ran the business, you can see very clearly that Charles Diggs Sr., the person who formed with his wife the funeral home, was a very generous businessman. I call him Papa Diggs, and his grandkids call him Papa Diggs. Papa Diggs really worked with his clients. Let me just say this. The House of Diggs buried the elite in Detroit and the poorest in Black Detroit. If you died in Detroit between the 1940s and the early 70s, you could bet that you would be buried by the House of Diggs. They buried half of the Black people who died in Detroit in the 1950s and 60s.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Of course, given that they worked very closely with the Black church community, Diggs was a close friend of Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha Franklin's father, who had a big church in Detroit, in Diggs's district. as a matter of fact. Diggs watched his father dealing with all kind of black people. People who, like Joe Louis, the boxer, the house of Diggs buried Joe Louis's mother. And I'm told that was one of the largest funerals in Black Detroit at the time. That would be an elite kind of funeral, you see. But they also dealt with men and women who worked in the factories, who were working class, who at times did not have the kind of funds to have a proper burial. And what I lay out in the book is that oftentimes Papa Diggs, the father, will find a way to bury your loved one in a proper kind of way and not worry about the cost. So Diggs, the congressman, began to value the diversity of our black community. He began to, I believe he really gets value black Americans and the diversity we've had. We all are not like Joe Louis and can have a big funeral for our mother, okay? But I can value that, but I can also value the working class guy from Ford Motor Company or Chrysler who was trying to put together the funds to bury their loved one. So I believe Diggs watched his father, who really had a wonderful reputation, the father of a business person. The House of Diggs Funeral Home supported community causes. It supported Little League sports in Detroit. The Diggs name was like gold in Black Detroit. People told me that. I interviewed people who knew the family, and they said, Doctor, their name was like gold.
So, considering that Charles C. Diggs Jr. is, and I'm going to go with your claim, is the most consequential black congressman, I guess let's talk about, who in Congress were some of his sort of allies when he was there.
Diggs was well liked by almost everybody in the Congress. This is one of the amazing things. Again, I talked to people who worked with him. He had the kind of demeanor, the kind of approach that really allowed him to work with men and women across the aisle, across ideological uh, understandings. Uh, so he had allies across the board. Diggs firmly believed that in order for Black Americans who were a racial minority and a numerical minority, that we had to have a broad-based coalition to get things accomplished. And so knowing that, Diggs practiced what I call a politics of strategic moderation. And what I mean by that is he understood that given our minority status, both racial minority and then a numerical minority, only 12, 13% of the population, if you're going to get civil rights and these kind of things done, you have to have a broad-based coalition. And so his approach was to try to work with as many people and as broad a spectrum as possible. Diggs could work with Adam Clayton Powell, who was his good friend, a black militant, a black radical. They were close allies and colleagues. Diggs stuck by Adam Clayton Powell when Powell got in trouble in the late 60s in Congress. Stuck by him all the way. So he could work with black radicals, black militants like Powell, and he could also work with conservative black people like Bill Dawson. He understood that you could not burn and tear down bridges if you're going to build and sustain coalitions in Congress. At the same time, he was not a pushover. He was a strong, forceful advocate for civil rights, and he would always speak out against bigotry and racism. So he had this real approach, real demeanor that allowed many people to want to ally and align with him.
And that to me, I think, is also important as a politician, not to throw Senator Bernie Sanders under the bus, but this has been my sort of critique of him, is that every time that he runs for, well, has run for president, I am like, okay, what he's saying is great. Like, this is nice. But I can't really figure out who his allies are. Like, is he actually impactful? Like, what are his relationships like?
Yeah.
Because as we know in politics, I mean, you're the expert, okay? Politics is a relationship game, right?
Sure.
Arena. And so when we talk about Congressman Diggs, it sounds like, yes, he had the allies, he had the friends. I mean, the fact that he founded the CBC alone tells you that, yes, we all need to band together to get some things done, for our people.
Yeah.
So you laid out a very strong claim about Mr. Diggs being the most consequential Black congressman. Before we conclude this wonderful episode, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know about Charles C. Diggs Jr.?
Yeah, I would say that Diggs really exemplify the kind of leaders that we need to have in America, not only Black America but across the board. One of the words that I attach to Diggs that I think is relevant for us today is that here was a leader who was persistent. It's one of the words that I think is really connects well with Diggs. That let's be mindful that we're talking about the 50s and 60s where Black people are really struggling to move forward in their quest for universal freedom. And so Diggs was going against the grain. He was going against the grain of the Democratic Party that controlled the damn Congress. These Southern Democrats that controlled the committees in Congress. He was going against the grain, but he was persistent. He would push and push, not only be persistent, but he would push and use the leverages of power that he had as a Congress member. For example, oversight. Oversight authority is something that Congress has over the executive branch. And so Diggs used his oversight authority as a Congress member to bring to light what was going on in civil rights, what was happening around the anti-apartheid movement. So persistence. We need leaders who are going to push, and not give up. And let me just add finally, Diggs' life as a Congress member and public official really highlights the fact that courage is significant and important. We need courageous leaders today who don't mind pushing against their party, as Diggs was doing throughout his career. This was a courageous leader who didn't mind stepping on toes if he had to. Okay, being mindful, he got to keep the bridges there. But if he had to push, he would do it in a courageous kind of way, not concerned about what kind of contributions he's going to lose if he or she stands up for a particular issue. We need today leaders who are going to be courageous leaders in all fashion.
I thought that was going to be my last question. It's not, Dr. Orr. So, considering the courage, I've noticed that, especially in our current American political climate with the president that we have right now, in my opinion, a lot of leaders have exposed themselves as cowards. I think that's a lot more widespread, not just in politics, but really in this entire country. There are a lot of cowards, a lot of people who will not say or do what they know is right because it affects their bottom dollar. So, with a heart, with the integrity of a Charles C. Diggs, let's put him here. Let's put him here in 2026. He's the Michigan congressman. He is, in the U.S. House of Representatives today. What do you think he would say about the current president, Trump?
Well, let me just say this: he would be very, very concerned about what President Trump has been doing policy wise. Don't forget, Diggs was a strong supporter of civil rights and Black Americans and Africans around the world. He would be very, very disappointed, for example, of the fact that Trump is providing refugee status for white South Africans, for example. Let me just also say that I think he would be most outraged by the Republicans in Congress. Diggs believed in the legislative branch. He believed in the whole idea of balance of power, and he would be just outraged that the congressional Republicans have simply relinquished the legislative authority, the oversight authority that is embedded in the Constitution that's supposed to bring this balance of power kind of separation and balance of power kind of. He would be certainly outraged, and he would be really, really pushing the Speaker and others in the leadership of Congress to do the work of the Congress. And yes, he would be doing it. And then he would be pushing and his colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus and saying, well, we're not in the majority, but that doesn't mean we can't hold hearings, for example. Okay? When Fred Hampton, the young Black Panther leader in Chicago was murdered, assassinated by the police and law enforcement in late 1960s, the Congressional Black Caucus held hearings. They went to Chicago and held hearings about the murder of Fred Hampton. So there's no reason why the Congressional Black Caucus today could not be holding hearings around the country, raising questions about Donald Trump, his policies, and raising issues that the Republicans in Congress have seemingly ignored. Oh, yes, he would be pushing his colleagues and saying, you guys are not doing what the forefathers expected. The forefathers expected Congress to be a place of bargaining and compromise. That's what they expected, and he would be disappointed that that kind of bargaining and compromise is not sort of taking place in Congress today. He would be very, very sad and disappointed about the institution of Congress in particular today.
Well, Dr. Orr, it has been a pleasure talking to you about the late, great, most consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs Jr. You've taught me a lot. Again, this is the first time I'm hearing this man's name in my entire life. I appreciate you
Thank
taking
you.
up the mantle, basically, in telling us, basically, I guess, resurrecting in a way his name and his legacy.
Yes,
So I'm really hoping that
this is a corrective history. Yes.
corrective history. That's correct. So there will be more after you, hopefully, right? Who talk about him. So thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for your viewers for listening to me. And go out and buy the book and tell others about it. It's a great read. I think all of you will enjoy it. I wrote it for people like those in your audience.
And again, the name of the book is House of Diggs, The Rise and Fall of America's Most Consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs Jr. Take care, Dr. Orr.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks again. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.